My wife passed away from cancer. At the funeral, my son's wife shouted, "This is the fault of that loser who couldn't pay for the treatment." I cried in grief, until my son took the microphone, called her forward, and revealed something that shocked everyone. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." The smell of lilies was suffocating. I stood there in my black suit, the same one Tiffany had helped me pick out for our 40th wedding anniversary just 2 years ago, staring at the mahogany casket that held the only woman I had ever loved. The St. Mark's Methodist Church was packed, every pew filled with faces I recognized from 4 decades of Sunday services, neighborhood barbecues, and Fred's childhood birthday parties. But none of it felt real. Tiffany was gone. After 22 months of fighting cancer, of sleepless nights in hospital chairs, of holding her hand through chemotherapy sessions that left her too weak to lift her head, she was finally at peace. I should have felt relief for her. Instead, all I felt was this crushing emptiness, like someone had carved out my chest and left nothing but an echo. I kept my eyes on the casket, focusing on the spray of white roses Fred and I had chosen together. Tiffany always loved white roses. She had planted them all around our backyard on Maple Street, turning our little corner lot into something that looked like a magazine cover. Every spring, she would spend hours pruning and watering, talking to those roses like they were old friends. "Dad." Fred's voice beside me was quiet, strained. I glanced at him and saw my own grief reflected in his face. At 37, he looked older than his years today, the weight of losing his mother etched in the lines around his eyes. His wife Maya stood on his other side, perfectly composed in her designer black dress, her blonde hair swept into an elegant bun. She hadn't shed a single tear during the service. The pastor was saying something about eternal rest and God's plan, but his words felt hollow. How was any of this part of some grand design? How was watching the love of my life waste away to nothing? Her body betraying her despite every treatment we tried, every specialist we consulted, every prayer we whispered in the dark, supposed to make sense. I had spent $120,000 on treatments over those 22 months, every cent of our savings, every dollar I could borrow against our house, the experimental treatments in Houston that insurance wouldn't cover, the nutritional therapy clinic in Arizona that promised miracles, the integrative medicine center in California where they charge $3,000 a week for hope, disguised as healing. None of it mattered in the end. As the service concluded and people began to file out, offering their condolences in hushed tones, I felt like I was drowning. Mrs. Patterson from next door squeezed my hand and whispered something about Tiffany being in a better place. My brother David clapped me on the shoulder, his own eyes red-rimmed. Our old friend Margaret promised to bring casseroles, as if food could fill the hole Tiffany had left behind. I was shaking hands and nodding, going through the motions, when Maya's voice cut through the gentle murmur of sympathy like a blade. "This is all his fault." Her words rang out clear and sharp in the suddenly quiet church. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned toward us. I blinked, certain I had misheard. "What?" Maya stepped forward, her carefully composed mask slipping to reveal something cold and accusing underneath. Her voice grew louder, carrying to every corner of the church. "This is the fault of that loser who couldn't pay for the treatment she needed." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my knees weaken, my breath catch in my throat. Around us, people gasped. I heard Mrs. Patterson make a small, shocked sound. "Maya," Fred said quietly, but he didn't move to stop her. "No, Fred. Someone needs to say it." She turned to face the crowd of mourners, many of whom were now staring at me with confusion and growing suspicion. He let her die because he was too cheap to get her real help, too stubborn to admit that maybe, just maybe, there were options he didn't explore because they cost too much. My hands began to shake. Every eye in that church was on me now, and I could see the doubt creeping into their faces. These people had known me for decades. They had watched me coach Fred's little league team, had seen Tiffany and me at every church potluck and community event. But Maya's words were planting seeds of suspicion, and I could actually watch them take root. "That's not true," I managed to whisper, but my voice was too weak, too broken to carry any conviction. "Isn't it?" Maya's voice was gaining strength, fed by the attention. "How many times did the doctors mention clinical trials you turned down because of the cost? How many experimental treatments did you refuse because they weren't covered by insurance?" I wanted to scream that every doctor had told us the trials were long shots, that the experimental treatments were more likely to cause suffering than healing. I wanted to explain that I had already bankrupted us trying to buy time, that I had explored every option that had even a slim chance of helping, but the words wouldn't come. "Maya, that's enough." Fred's voice was firmer now, but still he didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on his wife, and something passed between them that I couldn't read. "Is it enough, Fred? Is it enough that your mother is dead because your father chose his bank account over her life?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. I felt physically sick, my stomach churning as I looked around at the faces of people who had once respected me. Now they looked uncertain, troubled. Some were already whispering to each other, the seeds of Maya's poison taking root and spreading. "I spent everything," I said, my voice barely audible. "I gave her everything I had." Maya laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed off the church walls. "Everything? Really? Then why is there still money in your savings account? Why do you still have a house while she's in the ground?" I stared at her, unable to comprehend the cruelty of what she was doing. This was Tiffany's funeral. These were people who loved her, who had come to say goodbye and honor her memory, and Maya was turning it into a public execution. "Dad," Fred finally looked at me, and for a moment I thought I saw something like sympathy in his eyes. But then he looked away again, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. The silence stretched on, broken only by the uncomfortable shuffling of feet and the distant sound of traffic outside. I realized that everyone was waiting for me to defend myself, to fight back against Maya's accusations, but I had nothing left. The fight had gone out of me the moment Tiffany took her last breath. Instead, I turned and walked toward the exit, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. Behind me, I heard Maya's voice again, softer now but still carrying. "It's just so tragic when someone who should have protected her becomes the reason she couldn't be saved." I made it to the parking lot before the tears came. Standing beside my old Honda Civic, the same car Tiffany and I had driven to countless doctor appointments, I broke down completely. Not just from grief, but from the horrible realization that my own son had stood there and watched his wife destroy me, and he had said nothing to stop it. For 40 years, Tiffany and I had built a family based on love and respect. We had raised Fred to be honest, loyal, and kind. We had welcomed Maya into our family with open arms when they married 9 years ago, treating her like the daughter we never had. And this was how it ended, with me standing alone in a church parking lot, wondering if I had somehow failed not just as a husband but as a father too. The worst part wasn't even Maya's accusations, it was the silence. It was Fred standing there, saying nothing while his wife tore apart everything Tiffany and I had built together. It was the growing certainty that I had lost not just my wife, but my son as well. As I drove home through the familiar streets of our neighborhood, past the houses where Tiffany and I had made friends, past the park where we had pushed Fred on swings, I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my 63 years of life. The house on Maple Street felt empty and cold when I walked through the front door. Tiffany's reading glasses were still on the kitchen table next to a book she would never finish. Her coffee cup sat in the sink, waiting to be washed. Everything was exactly as she had left it, but she was gone forever. And apparently, I was completely alone. 3 days after the funeral, the phone calls started. The first one came while I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a bowl of cereal that had gone soggy 20 minutes ago. I hadn't eaten a real meal since Tiffany died, and everything tasted like cardboard anyway. "Vicente, it's Margaret." My old friend's voice sounded strained, cautious in a way that immediately put me on edge. I wanted to check on you. I'm managing, I lied, pushing the cereal around with my spoon. There was a long pause. Then Margaret cleared her throat. Vicente, I have to ask you something, and I hope you won't take offense. That thing Maya said at the funeral about the treatments, my stomach dropped. What about it? Well, some of us have been talking, and we're just wondering if maybe there's more to the story. I mean, we all know you loved Tiffany, but Maya seemed so certain about those clinical trials. I set the spoon down with shaking hands. Margaret, I tried everything. Every treatment the doctors recommended, every option that had even a chance of helping her. Of course, she said quickly, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. It's just that Maya mentioned some specific treatments, and well, she is family. She would know about these things, wouldn't she? After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my kitchen, feeling like the walls were closing in. These were people who had known me for decades, who had watched me care for Tiffany through every stage of her illness. Yet Maya's words had been enough to plant doubt in their minds about my character. The second call came from my brother David that afternoon. Look, Vicente, I'm not saying I believe what Maya said, but maybe you should talk to someone, a counselor or something. This kind of guilt after losing a spouse, it's normal, but— Guilt, I interrupted. David, what exactly do you think I'm guilty of? He sighed heavily. I don't know, man. I just know that Maya seemed pretty upset about some treatment options that got turned down. Maybe she knows something we don't. I hung up on him. By Thursday, Maya had called me twice, but I let both calls go to voicemail. I couldn't bear to hear her voice, to listen to whatever new poison she was preparing to spread. But late that evening, as I sat in my recliner watching television without really seeing it, Fred finally called. Dad, we need to talk. Do we? My voice came out flatter than I intended. Maya is really upset about how things went at the funeral. She thinks maybe she came on too strong, but she's just grieving too, you know. She loved Mom. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Maya, who had barely visited during Tiffany's illness, unless it was to ask about insurance coverage or to suggest that maybe a cheaper treatment might be just as effective. Maya, who had spent the last year of Tiffany's life making subtle comments about how much the medical bills were adding up. Your wife accused me of letting your mother die because I was cheap, Fred, in front of everyone we know, at her funeral. There was a long silence on the other end. When Fred spoke again, his voice was careful, measured. She's been talking to some people about Mom's case. She found some information online about treatments that might have helped. Online? I felt anger flare in my chest for the first time since the funeral. She's been researching your mother's cancer online. She's just trying to understand, Dad. She wants to make sure everything possible was done. The way he said it, so neutral, so diplomatic, made something inside me crack. This was my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, had stayed up with during countless colic-filled nights as a baby, had cheered for at every football game and graduation, and he was questioning whether I had done everything possible to save his mother. Fred, I want you to listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice shaking with controlled emotion. I spent $120,000 on treatments for your mother. I mortgaged our house. I cashed in my retirement fund. I drove her to Houston 12 times for experimental therapy that made her so sick she couldn't keep water down. I held her hand through chemotherapy sessions that lasted 8 hours. I slept in hospital chairs for months. I did everything the doctor said might help. Another long pause. Then Fred said quietly, Maya thinks there were other options. Maya thinks. I repeated the words slowly, feeling their weight. Your mother is dead, Fred. She died in my arms after fighting harder than anyone should ever have to fight. And your wife is playing detective on the internet, trying to prove that I killed her through negligence. That's not what she's saying, Dad. Isn't it? I stood up, pacing to the window that looked out over Tiffany's rose garden. Even in the darkness, I could make out the shapes of her carefully tended bushes. Because that's exactly what it sounded like at the funeral. Fred was quiet for so long I thought he had hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. "Look, I know this is hard. We're all grieving. But Maya has found some information about a clinical trial at Johns Hopkins that might have been an option. She just wants to understand why it wasn't pursued." I closed my eyes, leaning my forehead against the cool glass of the window. "Because Dr. Richardson said it wasn't appropriate for your mother's case, because the side effects would have been worse than the disease, because she was already so weak that the treatment would have killed her faster than the cancer. Maybe we should have gotten a second opinion." The words hit me like a slap. I had gotten second opinions, third opinions. I had consulted with oncologists in 3 different states. But Fred didn't know that because he hadn't been there for most of it. He had been busy with his job, with Maya, with his own life while I navigated the maze of treatments and specialists and insurance companies alone with Tiffany. We did get second opinions, Fred. Multiple opinions from doctors who actually examined your mother, not from websites your wife found on Google. Maya's just trying to help. Maya is trying to destroy me. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I was past caring. And apparently, she's succeeding. Fred sighed again. "Dad, nobody's trying to destroy you. We're just trying to understand what happened. Mom was only 63. She should have had more time." "Do you think I don't know that?" My voice cracked. "Do you think I don't replay every decision, every treatment, every conversation with every doctor? Do you think I don't wonder if there was something else I could have done?" The silence on the other end was deafening. "Fred, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Do you believe what your wife said? Do you think I let your mother die because I was too cheap to get her proper treatment?" The pause that followed was the longest few seconds of my life. When Fred finally answered, his voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear him. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Dad." After I hung up, I sat in my recliner until dawn, staring at the photo on the mantel of Tiffany, Fred, and me from last Christmas. We were all smiling, gathered around the tree in this same living room. Tiffany was already sick then, though we didn't know how little time she had left. She was thin but still beautiful, still fighting. Fred had his arm around both of us, looking like the devoted son I thought I had raised. Now that same son was questioning whether I had loved his mother enough to save her life. The next morning, I found myself at the corner diner where Tiffany and I used to have breakfast every Saturday morning. I ordered coffee and sat in our usual booth, the red vinyl cracked with age but comfortable in its familiarity. I was trying to work up the courage to eat something when Maya walked in. She spotted me immediately and made her way over, sliding into the seat across from me without being invited. She looked perfectly put together as always, her makeup flawless, her hair styled in a way that probably took an hour to achieve. "Vicente, I'm glad I found you." Her voice was soft, concerned, nothing like the sharp accusation from the funeral. "I've been hoping we could talk." "Have you?" I kept my eyes on my coffee cup, not trusting myself to look at her. "I want you to know that what I said at the funeral that came from a place of grief. I love Tiffany too, and I'm just struggling to understand why she had to die when there might have been other options." I finally looked up at her, and what I saw in her eyes wasn't grief. It was calculation, cold, careful calculation. "What other options, Maya?" She pulled out her phone and scrolled through what looked like a document. "Well, for instance, there was that clinical trial at Johns Hopkins, the one for patients with her specific type of lymphoma. I found the enrollment criteria online and she would have qualified. Dr. Richardson told us about that trial. He said the treatment was too aggressive for someone in your mother-in-law's condition." Maya's eyebrows rose slightly. "Did you get a second opinion on that?" "We consulted with 3 other oncologists. They all agreed." For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Disappointment, frustration. Then the concerned expression was back in place. "What about the immunotherapy clinic in Germany? I read about remarkable success rates for cases like hers." I stared at her. "Maya, that clinic charges $50,000 up front with no guarantee of success. We didn't have $50,000 in cash." "But you could have borrowed it. You could have taken out a loan against the house." I did take out a loan against the house. That's how I paid for the treatments in Houston. She frowned, consulting her phone again. Well, what about selling some assets? I know you and Tiffany had some valuable things, that antique furniture, her jewelry collection. And there it was. The real reason for this conversation became crystal clear. Maya wasn't questioning my decisions out of grief or love for Tiffany. She was conducting an inventory. Maya, why are you really here? She looked up from her phone, and for a split second her mask slipped completely. What I saw underneath was pure, cold ambition. Then she smiled, and the concerned daughter-in-law was back. I just want to make sure Tiffany got everything she deserved, Vicente. That's what family does for each other. As I watched her scroll through her phone, making notes about treatments and costs and options, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. This wasn't about justice for Tiffany. This was about something else entirely. And whatever Maya was planning, she was just getting started. She was building a case against me, piece by piece, question by question, and my own son was helping her do it. The following week brought a cold snap that seemed to settle into my bones and refuse to leave. I found myself spending most of my time in Tiffany's chair by the living room window, wrapped in the afghan she had crocheted during her first round of chemotherapy. The house felt enormous and empty, every sound echoing off walls that had once been filled with her laughter. I was sitting there, on Tuesday morning, watching the neighbor's cat prowl through Tiffany's rose garden, when I noticed Maya's car pulling into my driveway. My stomach clenched as I watched her get out, not alone this time, but with a woman I didn't recognize. They stood beside the car for several minutes, the stranger taking notes on a clipboard, while Maya pointed at different parts of the house. 20 minutes later, they were gone without ever knocking on my door. That evening, Fred called, again. His voice sounded different somehow, more controlled than it had been since the funeral. Dad, I wanted to let you know that Maya and I are going through some of Mom's papers. You know, trying to help you get organized. What papers? I asked, though something in his tone made me uneasy. Just medical records, insurance documents, that sort of thing. Maya thought it might be helpful to have everything in order for tax purposes. I frowned. Maya had never shown any interest in helping with paperwork before. During Tiffany's illness, she had made it clear that dealing with medical bills and insurance claims was too depressing for her to handle. I can manage my own paperwork, Fred. I know, Dad, but there's a lot of it, and Maya has experience with this kind of thing from her job. Maya worked as a medical billing coordinator for a large clinic across town. She just wants to make sure nothing gets overlooked. After I hung up, I went to the filing cabinet in Tiffany's study where we had kept all the medical records. The drawer was still locked, just as I had left it, but something felt wrong. The key was in the same hiding place behind the picture frame, but it seemed like the papers inside had been shifted slightly. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe grief was making me see threats where none existed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been going through our private documents. On Thursday, I was at the grocery store when I overheard two women talking in the cereal aisle. I recognized them from church, though I couldn't remember their names. I heard from Margaret that Vicente refused to take his wife to some special hospital because it was too expensive, one was saying. That's terrible. Poor Tiffany. Imagine knowing your husband chose money over your life. I abandoned my cart and left the store, my hands shaking so badly I could barely start the car. That afternoon, Maya called me directly for the first time since our conversation at the diner. Vicente, I hope you don't mind, but I've been doing some more research into Tiffany's case. I found something I think you should know about. What kind of research? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Well, I've been in touch with some patient advocacy groups, and they've told me about resources that might have been available, financial assistance programs for experimental treatments, charity funds for cancer patients, that sort of thing. My grip tightened on the phone. Maya, what exactly are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm just saying that maybe there were options that got overlooked in all the stress of the situation. These advocacy groups, they have experience helping families navigate the system. And what do these advocacy groups think should be done now? There was a pause, and when Maya spoke again, her voice had taken on a more formal tone. Well, some of them have mentioned that families sometimes pursue legal action when they feel like medical negligence or financial constraints led to inadequate care. The words hit me like ice water. Legal action. She was talking about lawsuits. Maya, are you suggesting that I was negligent in caring for your mother-in-law? I'm not suggesting anything, Vicente. I'm just exploring every option to understand what happened. Don't you want to know if everything possible was done for Tiffany? After she hung up, I sat staring at the phone for a long time. Maya wasn't just spreading doubt anymore. She was building toward something bigger, something that could destroy what was left of my life. That evening, Fred showed up at my door unannounced. He looked tired, stressed in a way I hadn't seen since his college finals. He stood on the porch for a moment, as if gathering courage, before speaking. "Dad, can I come in? We need to talk." I led him to the living room, noting how his eyes swept over everything as if he were seeing it for the first time. He sat on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." My heart started pounding. "What is it?" "The night Mom died at the hospital, you were alone with her when it happened, right?" The question was so unexpected, so bizarre, that for a moment I couldn't speak. "Fred, what kind of question is that? Just answer me, please. Were you alone with her when she died?" "Yes, I was alone with her. You and Maya had gone home to get some sleep. The nurses were down the hall. She just stopped breathing, peacefully. I held her hand until the end." Fred nodded slowly, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "And you called the nurses right away?" "Of course I called the nurses. Fred, what is this about?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, there was something in his expression that I couldn't read. Pain, maybe. Or confusion. "Maya has been asking questions about that night, about the timeline of events. She seems to think there might have been some delay in calling for help." I felt the blood drain from my face. "A delay?" "Fred, your mother was dying. The doctors had told us it was a matter of hours. When she stopped breathing, I called the nurses immediately. What exactly is Maya suggesting?" "I don't know, Dad. I honestly don't know what she's suggesting, but she's been making phone calls, asking about protocols for end-of-life care, talking about how family members sometimes make decisions that might not be in the patient's best interest." The implication was so horrific, so unthinkable, that I couldn't process it at first. Then, slowly, the full meaning of his words sank in. "She thinks I killed your mother." The words came out as barely a whisper. Fred's face crumpled. "Dad, I don't know what to think anymore. Maya shows me these articles about medical negligence, about cases where family members made decisions that led to preventable deaths. She has all this research about treatments we supposedly didn't try, financial resources we supposedly didn't access, and now she's questioning whether Mom's death was really as natural as it seemed." I stared at my son, this man I had raised to be honest and kind and just, and I saw a stranger, someone who could sit in my living room and suggest that I had murdered his mother. "Fred, look at me." My voice was steadier than I felt. "Look at me and tell me you believe I could hurt your mother. Tell me you think I'm capable of letting her die or worse." He met my eyes for just a moment, and in that moment I saw something that gave me the first hope I had felt in weeks. Doubt. Not doubt about me, but doubt about what he was being told. "I don't want to believe it, Dad, but Maya has so much evidence, so many questions that I can't answer, and she's right about one thing. You do still have money in savings. You do still have the house. You do still have Mom's life insurance money. If you really spent everything trying to save her, how is that possible?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of having to justify my love for my wife to my own son. "Because the life insurance money came after she died, Fred. Because I stopped spending on treatments when the doctors told us there was nothing left to try. Because at some point I had to accept that no amount of money was going to bring her back." When I opened my eyes, Fred was staring at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said something that surprised me completely. "Dad, I need you to trust me no matter what happens next. Can you do that? What do you mean? I mean that things are going to get more complicated before they get better. Maya is determined to pursue this, and I can't stop her. But I need you to know that no matter how things look, no matter what it seems like I'm doing or saying, I need you to trust me. The words were so unexpected, so different from everything he had been saying for the past week that I didn't know how to respond. Fred, what are you talking about? He stood up, moving toward the door. Just promise me, Dad. Promise me you'll trust me, even when it doesn't make sense. I don't understand. He paused at the door, his hand on the knob. When he turned back, there was something in his eyes that looked almost like an apology. You will. I hope you will. After he left, I sat in the living room until well past midnight, trying to make sense of our conversation. What had Fred meant about trusting him no matter what happened? Why had his whole demeanor changed from accusatory to almost protective? And why did I have the strange feeling that my son was trying to tell me something he couldn't say directly? The next morning I was awakened by the sound of my phone ringing. It was barely 7 o'clock, but Maya's voice was sharp and urgent when I answered. Vicente, I need to ask you about something. I've been going through Tiffany's medical records, and I found some discrepancies in the treatment timeline. Discrepancies? Yes, there are gaps in the documentation, appointments that were scheduled but apparently never happened, treatment options that were discussed but never pursued. I'm starting to wonder if maybe there was some kind of systematic pattern of neglect. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. Maya, what are you really after? I'm after the truth, Vicente. And I think the truth is that Tiffany didn't get the care she deserved. I think decisions were made that prioritized financial concerns over her well-being, and I think someone needs to be held accountable for that. The line went quiet for a moment, and when Maya spoke again, her voice had turned cold and businesslike. I've been in touch with an attorney, Vicente. Someone who specializes in medical malpractice and family neglect cases. He thinks there might be grounds for a wrongful death lawsuit. My blood turned to ice. A lawsuit against who? Against you, Vicente, for failing in your duty as Tiffany's primary caregiver and medical decision-maker. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered to the floor. I could hear Maya's voice continuing to speak, but the words sounded distant and unreal. She was going to sue me. She was going to take me to court and accuse me publicly of killing my wife through negligence. When I finally picked up the phone, Maya was in the middle of explaining something about legal procedures and evidence gathering. Maya, stop. My voice was hoarse. Just stop talking. Vicente, I know this is hard to hear, but you're going to sue me for wrongful death of my own wife. I'm going to seek justice for Tiffany. Someone has to speak for her since she can't speak for herself. She was my wife for 41 years, Maya. I loved her more than my own life. Then you should have acted like it when she needed you most. The line went dead. I sat there in bed, staring at the phone, trying to process what had just happened. Maya wasn't just spreading rumors anymore, wasn't just asking pointed questions or making veiled accusations. She was declaring war, and the worst part was, I still didn't know which side my son was on. The attorney's office was everything I expected and dreaded. Mahogany-paneled walls lined with intimidating legal volumes, a massive desk that seemed designed to make visitors feel small, and the sharp smell of leather and expensive cologne. I sat across from Robert Harrison, the lawyer Maya had threatened me with, trying to maintain some dignity while my world collapsed around me. Mr. Holloway, I appreciate you coming in to discuss this matter, Harrison said, his voice professionally neutral. I understand this is a difficult time for you. Is it true? I asked, cutting straight to the point. Is my daughter-in-law really planning to sue me for my wife's death? Harrison steepled his fingers, studying me with pale blue eyes. Mrs. Maya Holloway has consulted with our firm regarding what she believes may have been inadequate medical care decisions made on behalf of the deceased. She's presented some compelling questions about treatment options that may not have been properly explored. Compelling questions. I repeated the phrase slowly, tasting its bitterness. Mr. Harrison, I spent every dollar I had trying to save my wife. I consulted with specialists in 3 states. I pursued every treatment that had even a remote chance of helping her. I understand that's your perspective, Mr. Holloway. However, Mrs. Holloway has provided documentation suggesting that certain high success rate treatment options were declined, potentially for financial reasons. I leaned forward. What documentation? Harrison opened a thick file folder and pulled out several sheets of paper. Internet research regarding clinical trials, financial assistance programs that may have been available, treatment protocols from other medical centers that show higher survival rates for cases similar to your wife's. Internet research? I couldn't keep the disgust out of my voice. Mr. Harrison, are you seriously considering a wrongful death lawsuit based on Google searches? His expression didn't change. Mrs. Holloway has also indicated that there may have been questionable circumstances surrounding the actual time of death. Delays in calling for medical assistance. Decisions made without consulting other family members. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. She's suggesting I hastened my wife's death. She's suggesting that the circumstances warrant investigation. I stared at him, trying to comprehend the depths of Maya's malice. It wasn't enough for her to accuse me of being too cheap to save Tiffany. Now she was implying that I had actively contributed to her death. Mr. Harrison, what does Maya hope to gain from this lawsuit? Justice for the deceased, and of course there may be financial compensation appropriate to the loss suffered due to alleged negligence. Financial compensation. There it was. The real motive behind all of Maya's research and accusations and righteous indignation. She wanted money, and she was willing to destroy me to get it. How much money are we talking about? Harrison consulted his notes. In cases of this nature, awards can range from $100,000 to several million dollars, depending on the circumstances and the deceased's projected lifespan and earning potential. I felt sick. Tiffany hadn't worked outside the home in 20 years, having devoted herself to raising Fred and maintaining our household. But apparently Maya and this lawyer thought her life had a price tag that I could be forced to pay. And if I were to be found liable, who would receive this compensation? As the deceased's daughter-in-law and a member of the immediate family who was directly affected by the loss, Mrs. Holloway would be among the primary beneficiaries. Of course she would be. As I left Harrison's office and drove home through the familiar streets of my neighborhood, I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my life. Not only was Maya determined to destroy me financially and socially, but she was going to profit from it. And my son, the boy I had raised to value honor and integrity, was apparently going to let her do it. But when I pulled into my driveway, Fred's car was already there. He was sitting on the front porch steps, looking more agitated than I had seen him since the funeral. "Dad, we need to talk, right now." I followed him inside, noting how he immediately went to the windows and drew the curtains closed. He pulled out his phone and set it on the coffee table, screen down. "Fred, what's going on?" He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his teenage years when he was trying to work up the courage to confess some mistake. "Dad, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to everything I'm going to say before you react. Can you do that?" I nodded, though my stomach was churning with apprehension. Maya has been planning this lawsuit for months, since before Mom died. The words hit me like a hammer blow. "What?" "Let me finish, Dad, please." Fred's voice was strained but urgent. 3 months ago, Maya started asking me questions about Mom's finances, about her will, about what would happen to her assets when she died. I thought she was just being practical, trying to help us prepare for the inevitable. I stared at my son, unable to process what I was hearing. Then she started researching Mom's medical case, but not to help. She was looking for ways to prove that inadequate care had been provided. She was building a case for negligence even while Mom was still alive. "And you knew about this?" Fred's face was anguished. "Not at first. I thought she was just trying to understand the medical situation, maybe looking for treatment options the doctors hadn't mentioned. But then I started noticing things, phone calls she would take in private, websites she was visiting, documents she was printing out. He paused, taking a deep breath. Dad, Maya has been in contact with that lawyer for 6 weeks. She met with him for the first time 2 weeks before Mom died. I felt like I was drowning. 2 weeks before Tiffany died, Maya was already planning to sue me for killing her. Yes, and there's more. Fred pulled out his phone and opened what looked like a recording app. Dad, I've been documenting everything. Every conversation, every phone call, every meeting with the lawyer. I've been pretending to go along with her plan so I could find out exactly what she was planning to do to you. You've been recording her? For the past month, listen to this. He tapped the screen, and Maya's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. The old man won't know what hit him. By the time we're done, he'll be so broken that he'll hand over everything just to make it stop. Another voice, male, responded. And you're certain your husband will support your version of events? Maya laughed, a cold sound that made my skin crawl. Fred will do whatever I tell him to do. He's weak, just like his father. Besides, I'm the one with all the research, all the evidence. Who's going to believe Vicente over me? Fred stopped the recording, his face pale. Dad, she's not just after money. She wants to destroy you completely. She wants the house, the life insurance money, Mom's inheritance, everything. I slumped back in my chair, overwhelmed by the scope of Maya's betrayal. But Fred, why? Why does she hate me so much? Because Mom never liked her. Fred's voice was quiet, almost apologetic. Mom was always polite, always kind, but Maya knew that Mom saw right through her. She knew that if anything happened to Mom, she'd lose her influence over me, lose her place in this family. So she decided to make sure that if she couldn't have Mom's approval, she'd at least get Mom's inheritance. And you've been pretending to go along with this for a month. Fred nodded miserably. I had to, Dad. It was the only way to find out how far she was willing to go, to get evidence of what she was really planning. But it's been killing me, watching her tear you apart while I pretended to believe her lies. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't noticed before. The strain around his eyes, the weight he seemed to be carrying. He hadn't been weak or disloyal. He had been playing a dangerous game to protect me. Fred, what about the things you said to me? The questions about whether I had done enough to save your mother? I had to ask those questions, Dad. Maya was listening to everything, monitoring every conversation between us. If I hadn't seemed to doubt you, she would have known I was on to her plan. So you never believed her accusations? Fred's eyes filled with tears. Dad, I watched you care for Mom every day for almost 2 years. I saw you sleep in hospital chairs, hold her hand through chemo, research every possible treatment option. I know you loved her. I know you did everything humanly possible to save her. For the first time since Tiffany's funeral, I felt like I could breathe. My son hadn't betrayed me. He had been protecting me. What do we do now, Fred? He wiped his eyes and sat up straighter, and I could see something of Tiffany's steel in his expression. Now we stop her. I have hours of recordings, Dad. I have documentation of her meetings with the lawyer, her research into how to build a negligence case, her plans to manipulate testimony from family members. I have everything we need to prove that this entire lawsuit is fraudulent. But she's your wife. Fred was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was firm. She stopped being my wife the moment she decided to try to destroy my father to get money from my mother's death. He pulled out another piece of paper, and I recognized it as a legal document of some kind. What's that? Divorce papers. I filed them this morning. I stared at him in amazement. You're leaving her? I left her the moment I realized what she was planning. I just couldn't tell you until I had enough evidence to stop her lawsuit. He met my eyes. Dad, Mom raised me to value honor and integrity above everything else. Maya forgot that when she decided to wage war on our family. As I sat there looking at my son, this man who had risked his marriage and endured weeks of emotional torment to protect me, I felt something I hadn't felt since Tiffany died. Pride. What's our next step? Fred smiled, and for the first time in weeks it reached his eyes. Tomorrow we give Mr. Harrison a very different kind of evidence than what he's expecting, and we show Maya that she picked the wrong family to try to destroy. For the first time since losing Tiffany, I felt like I had an ally in this fight. My son had never abandoned me. He had been fighting for me all along. The family meeting Maya had demanded was set for Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock, in the same church fellowship hall where Tiffany and I had attended countless potluck dinners and community gatherings over the years. Maya had insisted on a neutral location, claiming she wanted witnesses to ensure everything was handled properly. She had no idea that Fred and I were walking into her trap with our own carefully laid plans. I arrived early, my hands steady for the first time in weeks. Fred was already there, sitting alone in one of the folding chairs arranged in a circle. He looked up when I entered, and we exchanged a brief nod. To anyone watching, it would look like the strained acknowledgement between a grieving father and a conflicted son. In reality, it was the quiet communication between allies preparing for battle. Maya swept in precisely at 2 o'clock, followed by her sister Carmen, whom I barely knew, and surprisingly, my brother David. She had assembled her own audience, people she clearly expected would side with her once she presented her case against me. "Thank you all for coming," Maya began, her voice taking on the formal tone she used when she wanted to sound authoritative. "I know this is difficult, but we need to address some serious concerns about the care Tiffany received before her death." She had prepared a presentation, complete with printed documents and highlighted passages from medical websites. As she began laying out her case against me, I had to admit it was impressive in its thoroughness. She had twisted every medical decision, every financial choice, every moment of doubt or exhaustion during Tiffany's illness into evidence of negligence. "Vicente consistently chose less expensive treatment options over more effective ones," she said, consulting her notes. "He refused to pursue clinical trials that could have extended Tiffany's life, and he declined to seek second opinions that might have changed her prognosis." David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Maya, those are serious accusations." "They're not accusations, David. They're facts. I have documentation of every decision Vicente made, and in case after case, he prioritized saving money over saving his wife's life." I watched Fred during this performance, noting how carefully he maintained his neutral expression. To Maya's eyes, he appeared to be listening thoughtfully, perhaps even nodding slightly at her more pointed arguments. She was so focused on building her case that she couldn't see the trap closing around her. "The most troubling aspect," Maya continued, "is the circumstances surrounding Tiffany's actual death. Vicente was alone with her for nearly 30 minutes before calling the nurses. 30 minutes during which he could have been providing aid, calling for help, attempting resuscitation." Carmen gasped audibly. 30 minutes? Vicente, is that true?" "No," I said quietly. "It's not true." Maya's eyes flashed with triumph. "The hospital records show a 30-minute gap between the time Tiffany's vital signs flatlined and the time medical staff were notified." "The hospital records show that I called the nurses immediately when your mother-in-law stopped breathing," I said, my voice steady. "The 30-minute gap Maya is referring to was after the nurses confirmed her death, when I was given time alone with her to say goodbye." Fred spoke up for the first time, his voice carefully neutral. "Maya, where exactly did you get information about hospital records? Those are private medical documents." She turned to him with a confident smile. "I obtained them through proper channels, Fred. As family members, we have a right to understand what happened." "What proper channels?" Fred pressed. "I submitted a request through the Patient Advocacy Office. They were very helpful once I explained my concerns about potential negligence." I watched Fred's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Maya had just admitted to obtaining private medical records through deception, something that could be both illegal and grounds for dismissing any lawsuit she might file. But she wasn't finished. "The point is, we have evidence of a pattern of neglect that ultimately led to Tiffany's preventable death, and I think it's time for Vicente to be held accountable." David looked between Maya and me, confusion clear on his face. "Maya, what exactly are you saying needs to happen?" "I'm saying that Vicente should face legal consequences for his negligence." I've consulted with an attorney who believes we have grounds for a wrongful death lawsuit." The words hung in the air like smoke. Carmen's mouth fell open. David stared at Maya as if he had never seen her before. "You want to sue Vicente for killing his own wife?" David's voice was barely a whisper. "I want justice for Tiffany. Someone has to speak for her since she can't speak for herself anymore." It was then that Fred stood up, and I saw something in his expression that reminded me so strongly of Tiffany that my breath caught. It was the look she got when someone had pushed her too far, when her patience had finally reached its limit. "Maya, I need to ask you something." She turned to him with obvious relief, clearly expecting him to support her position. "Of course, honey. How much money do you expect to get from this lawsuit?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "I'm not doing this for money, Fred. I'm doing this for justice." "But if you were to win a wrongful death suit against my father, how much money would you expect to receive?" Maya's eyes narrowed slightly, but she answered, "The attorney estimates anywhere from $200,000 to over $1 million, depending on various factors." "And who would receive that money?" "Well, as Tiffany's immediate family members who were affected by the loss, we would be the primary beneficiaries." Fred nodded thoughtfully. "So you could potentially receive up to $1 million if you can prove my father was negligent in caring for my mother." "Yes, but that's not why I'm—" "Maya, when did you first contact Attorney Harrison?" The question was asked so casually that Maya answered before she realized the trap. "About 6 weeks ago, when I first started researching the legal options for—" She stopped mid-sentence, her face going pale as she realized what she had just admitted. Fred's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath it. 6 weeks ago. That would have been 2 weeks before Mom died. The fellowship hall went dead silent. Carmen and David were staring at Maya with growing horror. Even I felt shocked, despite knowing what Fred had discovered. "You contacted a lawyer about suing my father for wrongful death 2 weeks before my mother was even dead." Maya's composure cracked. "That's not— I was just exploring options in case—" "In case what, Maya? In case Mom died and you saw an opportunity to get money out of it?" "Fred, you don't understand. I was trying to protect our interests." "Our interests." Fred's voice rose slightly. "Or your interests?" Maya looked around the room, clearly realizing that her carefully planned presentation had backfired spectacularly. Carmen was staring at her with disgust. David was shaking his head in disbelief. "Fred, you're misunderstanding the situation," Maya said, her voice taking on a desperate edge. "I've been protecting you, protecting us. Your father has money that should rightfully be ours. Tiffany's life insurance, the house, her savings. We deserve compensation for what we've been put through." And there it was. The truth finally spoken aloud. Maya wasn't seeking justice for Tiffany. She was seeking profit from her death. Fred pulled out his phone. "Maya, I want you to tell everyone. Hear exactly what you told me last night about my father." "What are you talking about?" "Tell them what you said about making sure he ends up broke and broken." Maya's eyes went wide with panic. "Fred, I never said—" "Tell them about your plan to manipulate witness testimony. Tell them about how you've been building a false case for months." "Fred, stop. You're being ridiculous." But Fred was already tapping his phone screen. Maya's voice filled the fellowship hall, clear and unmistakable. "The old man won't know what hit him. By the time we're done, he'll be so broken that he'll hand over everything just to make it stop." The recording continued, capturing Maya's cold calculation, her dismissive comments about Fred's weakness, her absolute certainty that she could manipulate the situation to her advantage. When it ended, the silence was deafening. Maya stood frozen, her face cycling through shock, anger, and finally, raw fury. "You recorded me. You've been spying on me." "I've been documenting your fraud," Fred said quietly. "Every lie you've told, every false accusation you've made, every illegal step you've taken to build your case against my father." Maya's mask finally fell away completely, revealing the person she had always been underneath. "You pathetic fool. Do you really think you can stop me? I have evidence, I have witnesses, I have an attorney who believes my case. You have lies, Fred said, and now everyone knows it. Maya turned her fury on me. This isn't over, Vicente. I'll destroy you, one way or another. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of monster you really are. No, Fred said firmly. You won't. He pulled out another document from his jacket pocket. Maya, these are divorce papers. I filed them yesterday morning, and these, he produced another set of papers, are copies of all the evidence I've gathered about your fraudulent lawsuit, which I'll be turning over to both Attorney Harrison and the State Bar Association. Maya stared at the papers as if they might burst into flames. You can't divorce me. We're married. We're a team. We stopped being a team the moment you decided to try to destroy my father for money. The room erupted as Maya began screaming, her careful composure completely shattered. She accused Fred of betraying her, me of manipulating him, everyone in the room of conspiring against her. But her words only served to prove everything Fred had recorded. As Carmen and David quietly excused themselves, clearly wanting no part of Maya's meltdown, Fred and I stood together, watching the woman who had tried to destroy our family reveal herself completely. Finally, Maya stopped screaming and looked around the room with wild eyes. When she realized no one was going to support her, no one was going to believe her lies, she gathered what was left of her dignity and headed for the doors. This isn't over, she said, her voice shaking with rage. I'll find another way. I'll make you both pay for this. After she left, Fred and I sat in the empty fellowship hall, surrounded by the scattered papers of Maya's failed presentation. Is it really over? I asked. Fred nodded. Her lawsuit was based on fraud and illegal access to medical records. Harrison will drop her as a client once he sees the evidence, and without an attorney, she has no way to pursue legal action. I looked at my son, this man who had sacrificed his marriage to protect me. Fred, I'm sorry you had to go through this. I'm sorry you lost Maya. He shook his head. Dad, I didn't lose Maya. I never really had her. I think deep down I knew what she was capable of. I just didn't want to believe it. As we walked out of the fellowship hall together, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Tiffany's death. Peace. Maya's war against our family was over, and Fred and I had won it together. 3 months after the confrontation at the fellowship hall, I was sitting in Attorney Harrison's office for what I hoped would be the final time. The mahogany-paneled walls that had once intimidated me now seemed merely pretentious, and Harrison himself appeared far less formidable than he had during our first meeting. Mr. Holloway, he said, closing the thick file folder that contained the remnants of Maya's fraudulent case, I want to personally apologize for any distress my firm may have caused you. Mrs. Maya Holloway presented what appeared to be legitimate concerns, but the evidence your son provided clearly demonstrates that her allegations were fabricated. Fred sat beside me, his divorce papers finalized just the week before. He had lost 20 pounds during the ordeal, the strain of maintaining his double life having taken a visible toll, but he looked more at peace than I had seen him since Tiffany's death. What happens to Maya now? I asked. Harrison's expression grew stern. Mrs. Holloway faces potential criminal charges for fraudulent access to medical records and attempted insurance fraud. The State Bar Association is also investigating whether her actions constitute criminal conspiracy. My firm has, of course, dropped her as a client and reported her conduct to the appropriate authorities. I felt no satisfaction in Maya's downfall, only relief that the nightmare was finally over. And the wrongful death allegations? Completely dismissed. The evidence your son gathered makes it clear that you provided exceptional care for your wife under extremely difficult circumstances. No reasonable person could view your actions as negligent. As we left Harrison's office, Fred and I walked slowly to our cars. The early spring air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of new growth from the trees lining the downtown streets. It was the kind of day Tiffany would have loved, perfect for working in her rose garden. Dad, there's something I want to show you, Fred said. Do you have time to come by the house? I followed him to the home he had once shared with Maya, noting that her car was no longer in the driveway. The house looked different somehow, lighter, as if a shadow had been lifted from it. Inside, Fred led me to what had been his home office. The room had been completely transformed. Where Maya's medical billing workstation had once dominated the space, Fred had set up something entirely different. "I've been working on this since the divorce was finalized," he said, gesturing to a beautifully crafted wooden display case mounted on the wall. Inside were photos of Tiffany throughout her life. As a young bride on our wedding day, holding infant Fred in the hospital, laughing at one of his childhood birthday parties, tending her roses in our backyard, and finally a picture from our 40th anniversary dinner, still beautiful despite the early signs of her illness. "Fred, this is incredible." "There's more," he said, opening a leather-bound album on the desk. "I've been going through all of Mom's things, organizing her photos, her letters, her recipes. I thought maybe we could put together a proper memorial for her, something that shows who she really was." I opened the album with trembling hands. On the first page was a letter Tiffany had written to Fred on his 16th birthday, her elegant handwriting flowing across cream-colored stationery. I read her words about the importance of integrity, kindness, and standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. "She raised you well, Fred. Better than I could have imagined." He smiled, but his eyes were sad. "I just wish I had stood up to Maya sooner. I should have protected you from the beginning." "You did protect me, in the way that mattered most." Over the following weeks, Fred and I began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship and healing from the trauma Maya had inflicted on our family. We spent hours going through Tiffany's belongings, sharing memories, and working together to maintain the rose garden she had loved so much. The whispers and speculation that had followed Maya's accusations gradually faded as the truth of her deception spread through our community. Margaret called to apologize for doubting me. David visited to express his shame at having been taken in by Maya's performance. Even some of the people who had spread gossip after the funeral reached out to make amends. But the most meaningful conversation came from Pastor Williams at St. Mark's Methodist Church. He stopped by the house on a Thursday evening, carrying a small potted rose bush. "Vicente, I wanted to bring you this," he said, holding out the plant. "It's a variety called Eternal Peace. I thought it might be appropriate for Tiffany's garden." We walked together to the backyard, where Fred and I had spent the afternoon preparing the soil for new plantings. The existing roses were showing their first buds of spring, promising another season of the beauty Tiffany had worked so hard to create. "Pastor, I need to ask you something," I said as we knelt to plant the new rose. "How do I forgive someone who tried to destroy everything my wife and I built together?" Pastor Williams was quiet for a moment, his hands gentle with the delicate roots of the plant. "Vicente, forgiveness isn't about excusing what someone did to you. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of carrying their poison in your heart." "I don't know if I can do that." "You don't have to do it today or tomorrow. Forgiveness is a process, not a destination, but holding on to anger will only hurt you, not Maya." As spring turned to summer, I found myself spending more time with Fred than I had since he was a child. We worked together in Tiffany's garden, painted the house, and began taking weekend trips to places Tiffany had always wanted to visit, but we had never found time for during her illness. On a warm Saturday morning in July, we were sitting on the back porch drinking coffee when Fred brought up something that had been weighing on his mind. "Dad, I've been thinking about what Mom would want us to do with her life insurance money." The $100,000 had been sitting untouched in a separate account since Tiffany's death. I hadn't been able to bring myself to use it, and Maya's accusations had made me afraid to touch anything that might be seen as profiting from my wife's death. "What do you think she would want?" Fred pulled out a folder he had been carrying. "I found this in Mom's desk drawer. It's a list she made of charities she wanted to support if she ever had the means." The list was written in Tiffany's careful handwriting. Cancer research organizations, patient support groups, a fund for families who couldn't afford experimental treatments. At the bottom of the list, in what looked like a later edition, she had written, Help other families avoid the pain we've endured. She wanted to help people, Dad. Even while she was dying, she was thinking about how to help others. That afternoon, we began the process of establishing the Tiffany Holloway Foundation for Cancer Patient Support. It would provide financial assistance for families facing expensive treatment decisions, exactly the kind of help Maya had falsely claimed we should have received. 6 months after Tiffany's death, on what would have been her 64th birthday, Fred and I held a small ceremony in her memory at the church. We invited the people who had truly known and loved her, not the crowd that had gathered for her funeral to witness Maya's performance. Margaret spoke about Tiffany's kindness to newcomers in the neighborhood. David shared memories of family holidays when Tiffany had gone out of her way to make everyone feel welcome. Mrs. Patterson read a poem Tiffany had written about finding joy in simple moments. When it was my turn to speak, I stood at the podium looking out at the faces of people who had loved my wife, and I felt her presence with me in a way I hadn't since the day she died. Tiffany believed that families were built on love, respect, and truth, I said. She taught our son that integrity wasn't just about doing the right thing when it was easy, but about standing up for what was right even when it cost you everything. I looked directly at Fred, seeing Tiffany's strength in his steady gaze. She would be proud of the man Fred has become. She would be proud that when faced with a choice between loyalty to his marriage and loyalty to the truth, he chose truth. That when forced to choose between personal comfort and protecting his family, he chose family. After the ceremony, as people shared stories and laughter in the fellowship hall where Maya had tried to destroy our family, I realized that we had won more than just the battle against her false accusations. We had reclaimed Tiffany's memory from Maya's attempt to weaponize it. We had proven that love and integrity were stronger than greed and manipulation. Later that evening, Fred and I sat in Tiffany's garden, surrounded by the roses she had planted and the new varieties we had added in her honor. The air was filled with their sweet fragrance, and the last light of day painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Dad, do you think Mom would forgive Maya?" I considered the question carefully. "I think your mother would forgive Maya for Maya's sake, not ours. But I also think she would never have allowed Maya to succeed in her plans." Fred nodded. "I miss her every day." "So do I, son, so do I." As darkness fell and the first stars appeared overhead, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Tiffany's death: complete peace. Maya's attempts to destroy us had failed. The community that had briefly doubted me had rallied around the truth. And most importantly, Fred and I had emerged from the ordeal with a stronger relationship than we had ever had. Tiffany's roses would bloom again next spring and the spring after that, and for many years to come. Her foundation would help other families facing the same impossible choices we had faced. Her son would continue to live by the values she had taught him, raising his own children someday to value truth and integrity above personal gain. And I would spend whatever years remained to me tending the garden she had planted, both in our backyard and in the hearts of everyone who had known her. Maya had tried to turn Tiffany's death into a weapon against our family. Instead, she had only proven how strong the love between a husband, wife, and son could be when built on the foundation Tiffany had created: honor, truth, and the quiet strength that comes from doing what's right, no matter the cost.